This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am joined today by Jill Bucaro, joining us all the way from Georgia. Jill Bucaro, of course, of Wellness Riot. How are you today, Jill?
I'm good, Jamie. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much. I see you have
Good.
a nice fall, kind of purpley colored
I
sweater on. That's very
do.
nice. Yeah, I
I'm
like that.
feeling the fall. I'm feeling the
So,
fall. Finally,
talk,
here in Georgia, we're feeling fall.
right. So, talking about fall,
Yeah.
my thoughts often turn in the kitchen to root vegetables. And I know you are a big fan. Tell us
I
about your
am.
love affair with root vegetables.
Well, I love them for this time of year. In fact, sometimes even in spring and summer, I
Yep.
wish it were root vegetable season because they're just so grounding. They make an appearance and they're really common things that, carrots, potatoes, sweet potatoes, all those good things that grow in the ground.
Mhm.
And so I think what I love about it, it truly does make you feel grounded. There's kind of that comforting they show up a lot in comforting foods, those comfort food, those soups and stews and things like that. But I just love them. I love them.
So different cultures all over the world have different relationships with root vegetables. Let's talk about the root vegetables that are most common in your part of the world, in the States, in Georgia, and things that
Yeah.
are perhaps a little bit more esoteric. And we'll compare that with what I have here in Canada, which should be reasonably similar, and then perhaps what I know from the UK.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think here, I mean, we see now in like farmers markets, which
Yeah.
as always is such a good place to see what's in season. So, but I know that even, up north, like closer to you in the US,
Mhm.
like Wisconsin and those, they're still at the tail end of some of their farmers markets.
Yeah.
So we'll see a lot of the same things, but like pumpkins, squash, like butternut squash, acorn squash, those winter squashes, carrots, beets, parsnips, garlic, ginger, turmeric, like those kind of
Mhm.
those roots, brassicas actually. So not technically a root vegetable, but those
Yeah.
hardy like Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, things like that. Kale, as far as greens, is hardy enough typically to make it, to
Yep.
this season. Onions, leeks, so things like that is what we tend to see now. And then I'd say, on the fruit side, maybe like some apples and it's more hardier fruits like that. But that's kind of what we're seeing where we are. And I would say that's probably true of like most of the US actually.
Yeah, and Canada, actually. It's
Yeah,
mostly the same. The other
yeah.
day I served up, now actually interesting to see what you call these. What do you call turnips? What is a turnip to you? And what is the difference between a turnip, a Swede, and a rutabaga?
Oh gosh. We have turnips, so I don't know that another name
Are
for
turnips,
them
are
here.
they quite small for you? Quite
The
small?
purplish kind of like maybe the size of like a tennis ball or a little bit smaller.
Yep, those are
Yeah.
kind of, I would call those sweet turnips. What do you call the ones that are as big as my head, sort of, they're that big, and they're normally covered in wax?
Oh, I don't know.
Because we call those turnips in Scotland. Um,
Oh,
and some people
hmm.
here don't call that turnip. They would call it a rutabaga.
Oh, rutabaga. Yeah, those are lesser known, I think, to most people here or,
Right,
in the
right.
US. But yeah, so it sounds like they're similar, but we wouldn't call that larger one, I don't think, a turnip unless
Right.
I might be out of the farming lingo here.
No, I actually, Jen had purchased, my wife had purchased a turnip the other day. And interestingly enough, turnip is actually an essential ingredient in that Scottish dish of haggis, neeps, and tatties, which is haggis, neeps is turnips, and tatties being potatoes. So we cook turnip quite a bit in that big wax form. You have to take
Hmm.
all that wax off and the skin and then boil it usually. But we served it to a friend of our son's, and he had never had turnip before. So this was a first for him. I'm not sure he loved it, to be honest. I ate most of it.
Well, that's his
But
problem.
now, culturally, root vegetables haven't always been given the love that they are given today. And even today, some people have issues with them. But I was reading yesterday that just 20 years before the US Civil War, carrots were not eaten by humans. They were a field crop for feeding to horses.
Oh,
Yeah, I didn't know
interesting.
that.
Was that
Yeah.
when they were all like multicolored? Because we really have streamlined to the orange carrot,
Yes.
but they
Yep.
used to
Yep.
be like every color.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And radishes as well. So radishes, round about that time period, we think of them as being almost like a dressing for salads and the like, or part of
Yeah.
this.
Hmm.
But back then they were growing quite differently and were quite different as a crop. And they were quite large tubers in the soil. And they were eaten as a like, they were regularly eaten, but not in the way that we eat them today at all.
Yeah, they are a root vegetable, and I think you're right. Like most of us would think of them as like almost like a summer or
Yeah.
spring, on
Yeah.
a salad or something like that. But and I'm kind of new to this too, like braising them,
Yeah.
roasting them, and it's like, oh, like most of us don't do that or don't know them to be utilized in that way. I love radishes, so I'm open to like different ways of having them, but it definitely has that summer feel,
Sure.
even though it is technically a
Yep.
root vegetable. Yeah.
So there's a restaurant, a great restaurant in London, the UK, called Rochelle Canteen. And one of the things that's quite unique about that place, sorry, you can't say quite unique, it's unique about that place, is the fact that when you sit down and you've ordered your cocktails, your drinks, they'll bring basically a bunch of radish, cleaned off and things, and salt to sprinkle on them. And you're just supposed to nibble on them and a little bit of salt, and it's quite delightful. It's a really nice way to start your meal. I love that.
Oh my gosh. When I was in high school, I worked at a restaurant, like a supper club.
Yeah.
And then when people ordered dinner, they got a relish tray. And
Hmm.
so it was different, like little like pickles and
Yes.
scallions and dips, and radishes were on there
Right.
as part of, I don't recall it being with salt necessarily, but it was part of this relish tray as like kind of that appetizer to the dinner.
So root vegetables in the UK at least weren't really a thing until 16th century, when most of those root vegetables were brought back from South America.
Hmm.
That's the case for most of Europe, actually. I
Yeah.
didn't know this about the potato. The potato was originally cultivated because of its pretty blue flowers, the floral aspect of it.
I didn't
And
know that either.
Marie Antoinette used to wear potato flowers in her hair. Didn't do her
It
much
sounds
good.
so
Yeah,
fancy and royal, doesn't it?
yeah, I know,
Potato
I know.
flowers.
I thought that was quite interesting. So the British have a real love now for root vegetables. I mean, there's the whole
Mhm.
joke about chips with everything because, yes, because they just if when the British go abroad across Europe, they'll be having, paella with chips or anything, shawarma with chips. Everything's with chips with everything. So there
Oh
is
my
that
gosh.
real love of that carbohydrate. Um,
Yeah.
but things are quite different across the channel in France. The French are quite snobby about root vegetables. So there are certain root vegetables that they don't have any problems with. They actually have a certain love of the turnip that we're talking about. And they, they,
Hmm.
they put that in so many. I mean, they absolutely adore it. However, they get very, very sniffy and laugh at the British for eating parsnip. There are many cases where the historical texts and even more recent ones, they cannot understand why the English, they would normally say, eat parsnips. Now, are
Oh,
parsnips a vegetable that you eat often, or are they
I
popular in
don't
your
eat
part of the
often.
world?
We didn't eat it growing up, but once I
Right.
was introduced to it, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, it's like a spicy potato.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
like if you do it with mashed potatoes, it's like, it reminds me of like that arugula or that radish kind of the
Yep.
potato family or that root vegetable family with that like little pepper or like almost horseradish like flavor to it.
Yes.
Oh, so good.
I That's one of my favorite things about Christmas because I always cook a platter of parsnip in various, normally roasted actually. But they're
I
one of
mean,
my
root
favorite vegetables.
vegetables and roasting, like you cannot go wrong with like a roasting a root vegetable, like carrots, potatoes, like Brussels sprouts. I mean,
Yep.
I know that's not a root vegetable, but those heavier vegetables, like roasting, like all day, squash. I mean, amazing.
I was reading some anecdotes about root vegetables in France, and one of them that was quite interesting. This person had been interviewing this older lady about root vegetables, and they mentioned Swedes. and Jerusalem artichokes. And she had heard that at some points during the war, when people were at their very last, some people had um, gnawed on Jerusalem artichokes or some other root vegetable, but that was the only knowledge she had of them. Now, Jerusalem artichoke is an interesting one. Is that something you see often where you are?
I don't see it too often, but
Yeah.
I love it. The one thing I will say about it, it reminds me like of ginger. Like it's a lot of work, like to
Yep.
get it's
Yep.
like the peeling and stuff, but it's like it is like all artichoke heart, which is like arguably the great. I mean, that's why
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
eat through
Yeah.
the leaves, right? Is to get to the heart. So I'm a big fan. I have to be ready to like put in the work
Yeah. Oh,
to,
sure.
like make it happen. Yeah.
So they're also known as sunchoke, right?
Mhm.
Or known in South America as the wind root in
Oh, I
translation,
didn't know that
because it
one.
tends to give you a bit of wind, or as my son loves to call them, fartichokes. But the interesting thing about Jerusalem artichokes is the name Jerusalem artichoke has nothing to do with the location of Jerusalem. Do you know how it came about?
No.
So it's not a fart joke, I promise.
Okay.
It's the,
Even if it was,
the,
I'm on board now.
so the French name for Jerusalem artichokes is girasol, which is the name for sunflowers in French, and it's related to sunflowers. And a
Okay.
mishearing of girasol is Jerusalem, therefore Jerusalem artichokes.
I love it. I love it. I knew you'd be full of like historical tidbits for this one.
Now, let's talk about the storage of root vegetables because older homes in Canada and indeed in the UK, but especially so in Italian or Portuguese neighborhoods here, they have cold rooms in their
Yeah.
cellars, right? And that was for the wintering of root vegetables for the most part. So let's
Yeah.
talk about the long-term storage of root vegetables today.
Yeah. So it does vary, from vegetable to vegetable, but I mean, we're talking like 3 to 12 months sometimes
Mhm.
for, if you're storing them correctly. And most of the times it is like a cool, dry place. But I mean, carrots can keep 4 to 6 months, potatoes, sweet potatoes, 4 to 6 months. Onions and garlic can be 6 to 12 months. I mean, really, amazing and makes a lot of sense because they come in at this time prior
Yeah.
to winter.
Yep.
So, strawberries and peaches and tomatoes aren't going to last, cucumbers aren't going to last, right? So you grow, I mean, it makes sense that those are spring and summer crops. You eat those right away. But the ones that are meant to be stored will get you through the winter. And I mean, I just think that's like the most amazing thing. And that's without preserving them. So
Mhm.
there are opportunities to can, dehydrate, freeze, ferment. But these are just, if you store them correctly in a cool place, onions like hanging, not somewhere where they're touching a surface. But
Right.
those,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you can look up, it's slightly different. Like some of them like a little bit more dampness, some of them like a little bit more dry. But I mean, in general, you have months and months of a window to utilize these, which again makes them perfect for winter when we didn't have to walk or drive to the grocery
Sure.
store where we could buy whatever we wanted. So, I mean, really a neat, feature of these kinds of vegetables.
Do you have a very favorite root vegetable?
Yeah, okay. Well, I have a couple. So I love spaghetti squash.
Okay.
So maybe I learned about spaghetti squash like 10, 15 years ago. And I remember I couldn't believe I had never known that you could like shred the squash to come up
Yeah.
with these strands. I was like blown away. I'm like, how did I not know about this? So that's an absolute favorite. And then I like the winter squashes like butternut, like delicata, acorn, those kind of like hearty, sweeter. Vegetables. So those are some of my favorites that I just love in like soups, roasted, that really something again, like on a cloudy day that just makes you feel like cozy.
I hear you. Well, I've already mentioned my favorite, which is parsnips. So, I have some friends around for dinner in a few weeks, and I tend to do this kind of autumnal lamb stew, but it includes almost every root vegetable you can think of.
I love it.
And parsnips play a big role in that. It's one of those
Yeah.
one-pot meals, obviously, but it's quite
Yeah.
delightful. Now, is there
Yeah.
anything else you would like to add about root vegetables before we part ways today?
Well, just that when you talk about having that, like that multi-root vegetable,
Yeah,
dish, the nutrients in your root vegetables tend to be the ones that help us feel grounded because they'll combat stress and things like that. So
I see.
like, there's fiber, vitamin A, C, potassium, folate, antioxidants, minerals. So it really again aligns with the rhythms of the season and helping us kind of keep our feet on the ground and stay really rooted
Yeah,
to the earth and the soil. And I think there's that connection too because they're grown in the soil, that true connection to the earth, and allowing us to be aligned and feeling that root, that grounded sensation or that feeling, as we go into like the fall. So it's just all of it aligns, right? It's almost like nature knows what it's doing.
I guess one of the things we haven't mentioned is the fact that they're relatively inexpensive as well. And while they
Yeah,
do require some preparation to add them to when you can eat many of them raw, but while they
right.
do require some preparation, they are very, very cost effective from a
Yeah,
nutritional point of view, for sure. Um,
yeah.
but I think some people, those who don't do that much cooking may be a little bit scared by how much preparation one has to put in. You may have to peel something. But when everybody's trying to watch their pocketbooks, I think root vegetables are an incredibly cost-effective route to decent nutrition.
I think that's a good point. And also some of them, like butternut squash,
Mhm.
carrots even, you can buy frozen,
Yeah.
which like butternut squash, I love it. And sometimes I don't even have the heart or the energy to like
Yes.
tackle it.
Yeah.
So I get it. And so those are other options because they're picked, at the height of their
Yeah.
season. So nutritionally, they're, going to save and hold on to a lot of their nutrients, but they're cut, they're cored, they're peeled, they're chopped. So those can be good options too, especially for things like soups or where
Of
you're going to
course. Yeah.
bake it.
Yeah.
So that's another option too. But I think that's a really good point. I mean, here in the US, when you were talking about potatoes, like, I mean, if it weren't for potatoes, Americans would get like none of their vegetable
Right.
intake.
Okay. Yeah.
And we're moving away actually from like it's called myplate.gov. So it's like where the fruit and vegetable and meal nutrient recommendations are. There are, alternatives coming up that are saying like, no, not only white potatoes.
Right. Right.
And
Okay.
so as with potatoes and ketchup, I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm getting my vegetables and my fruits. So yeah, we're very
And your
hip on
fruit. Yeah.
potatoes here, but I think that you're right that the root vegetables, and again, especially in season,
Yes. Yeah.
they're nutritionally dense and cost savings because that's what's in season. They don't need to necessarily travel or be held. So I think that's a really good point. And then there are ways to find them in a way that you can prepare without, too much work if that's what's
True.
holding you back.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us once again at Good Food
Of course.
Revolution. Next time we get together, we'll be doing something a little bit more seasonal because we'll be getting into December.
Oh,
Look forward to that. And thank you very much once again. Bye for now.
okay. Bye.
I think that was great.